What's your bias?
Well, my bias,
you
like you said, I'm right wing. I'm
What do you-
conservative.
if you had to if you go, God damn it, maybe I went too far down this road. If I could just relax one aspect of my dialogue, what would it be? Me, it would be my pipe smoking.
Your pipe smoking. I probably wouldn't talk about the marijuana issue. Question of the day before we get into this. Do you smoke cigars at all? And how many of you out there partake in the wacky tobacco?
There you go.
The marijuana.
At least 48 million Americans this past year and over 22 million this past month have partook in the wacky tobacco. I submit these numbers are much higher, as many people will not admit to using marijuana, even in states where it is legal due to their jobs, because it is still federally legal or for other reasons, even on an anonymous survey. For contrast, since Crowder fails to provide any here, there are about 8.6 million cigar users in the U.S. according to the CDC.
So I wanted to talk, I want to hear if your opinions have changed on this. I wanted to talk, there isn't really a whole lot of balanced or, I guess to use the word, nuanced discussion of marijuana out there. For that.
Crowder's previous videos on this topic have lacked both balance and nuance, and to date, he has never had anyone on the pro side of marijuana to debate this topic. He's only interviewed a group of teenagers in Ann Arbor, Michigan in 2012 that all agreed it should be legal, and has had one doctor on that he's had on both of his previous videos.
Matter tobacco. You get people who are radical on either side. As a matter of fact, I think the super pro marijuana lobby now, they have a lot of good arguments, but they sort of mirror the anti-tobacco lobby where they've really overshot their target.
Yeah, exactly.
Crowder never names these super pro marijuana lobbies, what their targets are, or how they're overshooting them. Instead, he just says there are lobbyists that make these claims. Any pro marijuana lobby's target would presumably be the legalization of marijuana, and by that measure they are certainly hitting their targets. The two most prominent and active super pro marijuana lobbies in the U.S. are the Marijuana Policy Project and NORML, the National Organization for the Reformation of Marijuana Laws. To date, neither organization has ever appeared in Stephen's videos on marijuana, and Stephen has provided no evidence any of the reputable marijuana lobbies have ever made such claims.
So this is a quick segment to hopefully maybe present a balanced view of the benefits, and they are real for both, and drawbacks of both marijuana and tobacco, and really more so kind of their active chemicals.
Keep in mind, the title of this video is Cigars versus Marijuana, not Nicotine versus THC, so we'll try to keep up with Crowder as he gets himself lost in the semantical weeds. Since Crowder doesn't cover any basic facts in the video about either substance, we'll briefly touch on their history of human use and their safety. Nicotine is an addictive alkaloid of the tobacco plant. The tobacco plant is native to the Americas, and a recent study has found that humans were cultivating and using tobacco as early as 12,300 years ago. A half to 1 milligram per kilogram of weight can be a lethal dosage for adult humans, and 1/10 of a milligram per kilogram of weight for children. However, a 2013 review suggests that the lower limit causing fatal outcomes is 6.5 to 13 milligrams per kilogram of weight orally, which is equal to 500 to 1,000 milligrams of ingested nicotine. The previous study and lower threshold are considered the official standard in both the US and in Europe. While unlikely, it's possible to die from nicotine poisoning, and there are cases of people having fatal outcomes after ingesting nicotine, usually, but not always, in liquid form. The average cigar has between 100 and 200 milligrams of nicotine. Cannabis has been in use for at least 5,000 years, with the Chinese discovering over 100 medicinal uses by 100 AD. Cannabis arrived in the U.S. as hemp and was grown alongside every other crop, primarily to make ropes for ships' rigging. It began to be smoked recreationally in the U.S. during the decade between 1910 and 1920 with the arrival of Mexican refugees fleeing their Civil War. It became popular with the jazz musicians of the era and spread from there. For marijuana, or THC, a median lethal dose has not been established in humans, and there has never been a recorded death from marijuana overdose. It has been estimated that a marijuana consumer would have to ingest or smoke 1,500 pounds of marijuana within 15 minutes to provoke a fatal response. This is simply not possible.
First thing I want to say is they're very important in an important way, rather, in that most of the research related to both marijuana or cannabis, I know people are like, don't say marijuana, that was a DEA term, cannabis, and tobacco. Most of the research is it's preclinical at best, and that's because we haven't been able to study either of them very well. So with marijuana, that's because it's a Schedule I drug, which I absolutely am against. I think most people who even think that marijuana is bad for you, of course, we still should be allowed to have some kind of medical research.
Yeah.
Crowder is trying to paint a picture that there is not much clinical research into nicotine or marijuana, when that just isn't the case. The Schedule I ban on any medical research with marijuana only applies to companies applying to do research in the United States, and countries like Israel have been researching cannabis for 60 years, where in 1963, THC, CBD, and several other cannabinoids were first isolated and synthesized. These same labs would go on to discover the endocannabinoid system 25 years later in 1988. Other countries that have conducted decades of medical and other research on marijuana include the Czech Republic, Uruguay, Canada, Spain, and the Netherlands.
And then nicotine hasn't been studied a whole lot because it's been the face of one of the greatest public health scourges and subsequent crusades of the last century, really. So you don't have a ton of it. So I want to make sure that I'm very clear. The research there is scarce.
Scarce? Typing in nicotine clinical research into PubMed yields over 60,000 results. The same search in Google yields tens of thousands more. Crowder is also lying about tobacco being the victim of some demonization campaign against it over the last century. The last cigarette commercial aired on television in the U.S. in 1971. The cigarette ads can be found to this day in many major magazines. I was able to buy cigarettes in 1988 at 11 years old in Louisiana with no questions asked, and continued to do so throughout high school in the mid-90s in Florida. These are but a few of the examples of cigarette, cigar, and chewing tobacco ads through the past century.
Asked, what cigarette do you smoke, Doctor?
Got a better idea. Let's take a Winston break. That's it. Winston is the one filter cigarette that delivers flavor 20 times a pack.
Bull of the woods, chewing tobacco. Bull of the woods, chewing tobacco.
That didn't matter because he lived up to his claim. He was a tobacco-chewing workhorse of a man.
The only effective tobacco demonization campaign in the last century was from an organization called Truth, which began a series of hard-hitting television commercials in 1998. It's hard to imagine how such an organization can limit the research into nicotine, and it is not currently illegal to conduct any kind of research into nicotine whatsoever. In contrast, marijuana has been the actual unwarranted victim of a demonization campaign for the last century. Every day in America, any citizen can be pulled over and then searched simply based on a law enforcement officer's claim that they smell marijuana, but they then have probable cause to search you and your possessions without the need for a warrant. Police routinely use this as an excuse to circumvent the Fourth Amendment's protections against unlawful search and seizure. An officer cannot say that he smells cigar and then claim to have probable cause to search your vehicle. So the only similarity between nicotine and THC is that you can smoke them both.
Don't see misdemeanor site. 10-4-12. This has been an eye-opening experience for me, okay? Never been pulled over, never searched like this. I was like totally violated over there a few minutes ago. I had a finger in my ass and a finger in my pussy, and this is so embarrassing to me.
This is because somebody's a daily smoker in that car, okay? And you can attribute it to
and they essentially found that there are 3 conclusively proven benefits from cannabis. Okay, treatment of chronic pain in adults, and I want to be really clear. Like, this is chronic what they call neuropathic pain.
Yeah,
so people are like, I had a tooth removed, and I decided to smoke a joint instead of take the pain. That doesn't work at all.
No,
okay,
it's the kind of
you're
leg
just going to
pain.
be in a lot of pain and paranoid about the dentist's tools.
Helps you forget about it.
It's the sciatic nerve pain. It'll help something like that.
Things like
right?
fibromyalgia, treatment of chemotherapy-induced nausea. Again, this is something the medical community said this is concretely it works.
Wait, what?
And then treating symptoms of multiple sclerosis.
Yeah.
Then there are some maybe other therapeutic effects like improving sleep. You can look up all of these studies on PubMed. I think it's important to be honest about the benefits,
of course,
as well as the drawbacks, because some people tell you that it cures everything.
And some people will claim alcohol will keep you warm in the winter. This is always the straw man that Crowder diligently stuffs before his discussions on marijuana, and it's completely irrelevant to the topic. Marijuana isn't being legalized at an exponential rate in the country because the majority of the public has been fooled into thinking it cures cancer. It's happening because the public understands that marijuana is nowhere near as harmful as tobacco and alcohol, and, most importantly, that the sky hasn't fallen in the decade of marijuana legalization beginning in Colorado and Washington. Since then, 16 other states have legalized and many more have pending legislation to do so.
Something else that's really important for people to know, like people say, why are you putting glaucoma on there? Here's the thing. You can have marijuana help with a condition.
Right.
But it may not be super effective, and it's significantly less effective with more side effects than other drugs available.
Okay, but we're supposed to be comparing cigars versus marijuana. Are cigars used for glaucoma treatment?
Sometimes I know everyone's going to say Big Pharma. No, I don't work for Big Pharma. Okay, this isn't paid for by the Koch brothers or Pfizer.
Yes, you do.
Like glaucoma, they have better drugs that last longer and are more effective. And so at that point, you say, okay,
So now this is becoming a competition instead of just whether or not it's an effective medicine.
Just like anything else, just like other conditions, we have a more effective drug for that.
Exactly, but it doesn't mean marijuana doesn't help.
No, and it may be one of the most effective drugs currently available for chronic neuropathic pain and those conditions that we talked about. So, something else, a lot of people are going to be surprised when I say benefits of tobacco or its active constituent here, nicotine. Controversial, I know. Nicotine, when separated, by the way, from the dangerous habit of cigarettes, specifically inhaled tobacco, not the boogeyman it's made out to be. And I know you're going to say, well, I'm just trying to justify this habit. All right, in order of safety, it goes cigarettes, and then and then probably chew and snuff. What is it? The Swedes snus in the nose?
Snooze.
I don't know. And then it goes
You put
down
that in the nose?
Then it goes probably cigars and pipes because you're not. And then it would go to like vaporized nicotine, pure nicotine or nicotine.
And then marijuana would be found nowhere on that list.
Gum. Nicotine by itself actually eliminated from tobacco. When they did studies on mice, it was almost impossible for them to get the mice addicted to nicotine by itself.
Really?
Without the other active.
But we're not talking about pure nicotine. We're talking about cigars.
By the way, a recent FDA study found that smokers of 1 to 2 cigars per day, the increased risk of cancer is statistically nearly insignificant. And in 19...
And for comparison to marijuana, this meta-analysis study last year suggests cannabis use may actually reduce cancer risk overall in the U.S. and found significantly less oral, head, and neck cancers in cannabis smokers. Added bonus, there's not an increase in mortality rate with them either.
By the way, also,
that's good.
No increased mortality rate. Just want to be clear about that. And there are some studies where pipe smokers lived longer. So, Bill, good on you.
Equally good news for marijuana pipe smokers.
By the way, there are a lot of neuroprotective elements to nicotine.
And there's plenty of data suggesting the same for marijuana.
That have been proven. Studies have shown that it's actually inversely correlated with neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's.
And once again, there's plenty of data suggesting the same for marijuana, and Crowder doesn't acknowledge this fact during this segment.
Disease.
Yeah.
Okay, they're even studying nicotine right now as an adjunct therapy, and this is pretty controversial. It's not a secret, by the way, to anyone who's used it. Nicotine, of course, helps with visual attention, working memory, even prospective memory, which means prospective memory as opposed to working memory means kind of the ability to sort of make plans, then remember them and follow through.
Pot does not help you with that.
No, pot does not necessarily. Well, some people will be like, man, you just need a good sativa. For what? For what? There was one.
Yeah.
Matter, it is so well known. Noted psychologist. She's actually been cited quite a bit. I want to make sure I have her name right here. Jennifer Roosted. I don't know. She's from the University of Sussex in Britain. She called nicotine the most reliable cognitive enhancer that we currently have.
Oh wow.
That's a doctor, not myself. There you go. There's an appeal to authority fallacy because I like my cigars.
If we keep to the versus theme of this video, as we see here, marijuana has more beneficial uses than nicotine. Fun fact, Google what nicotine is mainly used for, and its main use is used to treat nicotine addiction.
And this should be something like you want someone like me on your side. Okay, you want people like the people in this room who aren't really pro potheads, do not necessarily partake, saying, okay, maybe there's something here. We want to see some more research. I certainly don't want people going to jail for nonviolent drug-related crimes.
And there it is. Someone like you on our side. For what? This is your third video on the topic in the last decade, and they're your most disliked videos. 16 states have legalized marijuana since your first video on this subject, including your home state of Michigan, showing you have absolutely no influence whatsoever on the marijuana legalization effort. The like to dislike ratio in the comments on these videos are quite revealing. People aren't listening to you because you won't debate anyone on the subject, and they're tired of your platoon of strawmen and snarky attitude towards consumers, as shown by your insistence at using names like stoners and potheads. Imagine referring to anyone who drinks alcohol as drunks and alcoholics anytime it's discussed. You expect to get anywhere talking to people like that? This is another flaw in Crowder's entire view on the subject. He and his cohort Gerald just said that they weren't pro-pothead and normal people. They view this as an us versus them battle when this is just a cut and dry constitutional issue and a matter of misinformed opinions caused by decades of outlandish and false government and Hollywood-produced propaganda.
Let's get to some of the drawbacks with cannabis. Some people get mad that I even say marijuana. One is pretty undeniable, okay? Marijuana is harmful to the developing brain, meaning it can cause permanent deficits, people who use it before the age of 25. Same reason you can't rent a car without paying a fee until you're 25. Right. The other here is more controversial. These are the two clinically proven drawbacks of cannabis. There seems to be pretty solid consensus among scientists and psychologists that marijuana exacerbates psychiatric conditions, or at the very least can act as a trigger to those who are already predisposed to them. Okay? Want to be clear.
But when you overlay a map tracking the prevalence of marijuana use over one with the prevalence of schizophrenia on the planet, you see the opposite of what Crowder is claiming. There is also currently no correlating data to support that mental illness is increasing relative to marijuana use increasing.
To them. Okay? Want to be clear. Drawbacks, tobacco. Similarly, smoking tobacco products, by the way, can cause cancer, obviously. Again, this is mainly in relation to cigarettes. Also, when inhaled, cigarettes, clearly extremely addictive. Again, though, the rats couldn't get addicted to nicotine by itself. And I say this as someone who partakes, and all of us here either occasionally smoke cigars or pipes.
It's because you force me to.
Don't smoke them every day, and if I don't feel like it, I don't feel like it.
Yeah, exactly.
I've never once been like, oh, I'm nicking for a cigar.
Well, and everybody just, they kind of conflate nicotine with cigarettes. Every time they hear nicotine, they think cigarettes, and they think all the additives and all the bad stuff that is in cigarettes that is obvious that's been proven.
And that's why it's hard to study.
Crowder's constant argument that nicotine is hard to study because cigarettes are bad is truly a bizarre stance to hold. Nicotine is not illegal and can be readily obtained in a pure liquid form, and there are thousands of studies on it alone and not just its combination with tobacco. What exactly would be hard to study about it?
Right, exactly.
I mean, the other part of that is I know what people are going to say, because whenever you want to get into the science of this, folks are going to go, but so what you're saying is that cigars are not dangerous. They have no increased risk. Well, there's a difference between a certain small degree of risk, which is certainly there is more risk of getting cancer from tobacco products if you're using them than if you're not.
I mean, cheeseburgers.
But, exactly. I mean, all kinds of things. But there's a big difference between cigarettes and cigars and pipes.
Yes,
I
they
mean,
can kill you too.
God, those are
but here's the
whole
thing
different
too.
category.
Think about this: the positive effects, the relaxing effects, reduce stress that you can have from smoking a cigar, or not a ton of cigars, but a little bit, right?
Something marijuana is also known for.
By the way, that also brings us to some of the big money shadow figures. A lot of people don't know this, the pro-marijuana lobby. They have a lot of big billionaire backers, too. People say, oh, you're paid by Big Pharma. Well, George Soros has fronted a lot of organizations that push the cannabis.
Explain exactly how it matters that George Soros backs legal marijuana. It shouldn't be illegal, period, and the more funding to reverse that is fine with me.
And something else that pushed the cannabis, that sounds like I'm out of touch there. Anyone who pushes something as a fantasy...
Pushes the old weed.
Yes. This is something crazy to you. A lot of people don't understand. Look into the relationships between big marijuana and Canada, because they all have to kind of go through Canada right now since it's gotten the green light from the government there. Big corporations, I don't know if it's InBev or Anheuser-Busch, they're now looking into cannabis drinks. When people say, oh, Big Pharma, you're paid by Big Pharma, if you have any opinion other than cannabis works for everything.
And once again, Stephen presents no evidence whatsoever of anyone making this argument.
Well, what about the big corporations who are selling your marijuana now that it's legal? You hate big corporations as a general rule, but all of a sudden they toss a little bit of THC isolate into your soda. They're inherently altruistic.
Who is Crowder even talking to right now? I don't hear of anyone complaining about these things in Colorado, and as you call corporate weed, isn't the majority of what's available in dispensaries anyway. The majority of grows in Colorado are just small businesses, like the one you see on your screen here. For a visual reference in size and how many plants we're growing, the farm in the foreground with the greenhouse grew about 7,000 plants this year. It's now double the size for this season and is expected to do over 15,000 plants.
Exactly.
Those are the cool guys, man.
And there's
Those are good guys.
gigantic corporations betting huge on this right now. So this is not like a small mom and pop field growing pot.
Yes, they mostly are.
Yes, and that is going to be something very interesting because just like with alcohol, with marijuana, the bulk of purchases come from people who chronically consume. It doesn't tend to involve people who occasionally consume. So if they're making these marijuana-infused, like beverages, things like that are going to be released in Canada and, of course, states where it's legal, well, do they have to create a drink to sell to the people who already partake in marijuana regularly, in which case it has to be a much higher dose, or do they want to reach new users? Do they want to create a new market share?
Marijuana drinks are already available and have been for quite some time. Most marijuana users smoke. They don't want to do edibles or drinks because there's just no way of controlling the dosage. And thanks to having people such as yourself in control of the regulations that know next to nothing about marijuana, the drinks are regulated to a pretty low amount of THC, so the companies can want to make it stronger all they want. They'll still be restrained to that amount by law. Recreational drinks in Colorado are maxed out at 100 milligrams of THC.
Which, of course, tobacco companies were vilified for doing.
That's because their products are killing 500,000 Americans a year.
In which case, so they would have to sell a product that really doesn't cater to their base. So it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out. And I want to know what everyone else out there thinks.
How this shakes out? Marijuana has been legal in Colorado and Washington for a decade now and was legal for about 8 years at the time of your video. There's volumes of information proving it's been a success, but you just don't bother looking or just refuse to accept it. You didn't present one piece of information from any state that has legalized marijuana in this entire video. For people like you, there will never be enough research on marijuana for them to accept its medical or recreational use, and the goalposts will be in perpetual motion. I personally have been hearing this same argument from people against marijuana about not enough research for nearly 30 years, all the while the research is ongoing. Can you describe the type of research you'd like to see on safety that alcohol and tobacco have done on them that led you to the conclusion that the risk was worth it for those two substances? You and your crew also mocked the very scientifically separated main two subspecies of cannabis and the vastly different psychoactive effects of the two when consumed. There's even a third subspecies, Cannabis ruderalis, but we wouldn't want to overload you or your research department with too much information. Instead, you and your crew were sure to snicker and mock the caricature stoner marijuana advocate while simultaneously demonizing anyone who chooses to get their nicotine from a different method than your sophisticated cigars. I'll close with this question. What threshold for safety have tobacco and alcohol met that marijuana needs to reach before you're as comfortable with it being legal as you are with them?